Hey everyone, welcome back to the Cosmic Bridge with me, Michael Hansen. Good afternoon, good morning, good evening, good night, depending on where you are listening to us from and what time of day it is. Today we have on the show James O'Malley. He also goes by the name Jay, and he is the CEO of Fusion Community Initiatives, and they do leadership training with Fortune 500 companies as well as smaller companies. I was actually introduced to him by my colleague Katerina, who did leadership training with him and really enjoyed it. But we're not going to be talking too much about what he's doing at the moment. We're going to be talking a lot about his past, which is super interesting. He's actually an Irish guy, but was in the British Army, so that's a rarity in itself. And he's medically trained, so he was a doctor. And what he was actually doing in places like Afghanistan was leading a team of 300 combat medics. So you can imagine he's got incredible war stories and obviously quite sad stories as well. So he's going to be going into that. But I think the most interesting thing he's going to be talking about today was an expedition he led on Mount Everest. It was for charity. They did things like play rugby near the summit. And he did an amazing job of raising £500,000. But it's a really interesting story around when you're a leader, you've got to look after yourself as well, because he was so worried about all the other people on the expedition. He didn't look after his own health, and this led to a near-death experience. He had this crazy experience in a hospital where his soul left his body, and he was looking at people in the hospital and they had weird energies and stuff. So we're going to be getting into some kind of funny topics today, but like really crazy stories that you're going to love. So you got to listen to this one. I wanted to start off talking about your time in the Navy, because I know you were there for over 10 years, from what I understand. And obviously, it's not like countries like, say, Israel, where, military, there's not kind of compulsory service over here. So I was wondering, what drove that decision? Why did you decide to go into the Navy?
Okay, so I fell into the military by accident. Never had any interest in it whatsoever. My older brother did, who was killed in a motorbike crash when I was in my early 20s. But maybe subconsciously that had something to do with it, I'm not sure, but it definitely wasn't conscious. So I was in the ambulance service. I had a pretty bad weekend, and I was just walking past the careers office, and I saw this massive poster saying, Navy medic be the ultimate paramedic. So, and there was a guy stood there in camouflage with a gun and treating the casualty, and I thought, that looks pretty cool. It's better than what I'm doing at the moment. So I literally hung around the careers office in the morning. I would love to say there's some massive historic family relation to the military or not, but there's not. Why did I join it? I wanted the spirit of adventure. I thought you could actually make a real difference. I didn't know an awful lot about it. Like I said, I hung around the careers office until it opened, and then I went in and had a chat. And then because of my medical background, I was in great demand when I went in. So I spent a lot of time working with the Royal Marine Commandos, and a bit of time with some other companies within the military as well. I was in it for 15 years, commissioned to be an officer, and then my first role as an officer was the 2IC for the Med Group for Afghanistan. So I went from being on the ground to being shot at, treating casualties, to being strategic planning for the operation and providing troops for operations on the ground and to all the different locations in Afghanistan. My last job in the military was with the EU. So we were doing counter-piracy stuff in East Africa, and then we were doing the land effects. I was with EU Special Forces. I worked with Spanish, Dutch, French Special Forces on the ground. Did quite a few operations in Somalia. Can't really go into too much detail on them.
No.
But it was a great time, and it was very rewarding. And then by the end of my time there, I just wanted to transition out of the military and do something else.
Okay. I wanted to take a step back to your time in the Navy and the Marines. As you mentioned, some of the stuff you can't talk about, but you mentioned some countries, Somalia, Iraq, Afghanistan. What were like some of the toughest challenges you faced like during that time over there?
Okay, so Iraq was my first operational deployment. I went there very green, not knowing what to expect. Medical side, I was quite happy with because I was dealing with that in the UK already. But it was a bit of an eye opener. We were there at the initial part of it. So within the first hour, we were like 3 hours in. So we were very, very fresh on the ground. We had quite a lot of contacts. That was something I wasn't used to. A contact is when people are shooting at you and trying to kill you. and then you're defending yourself. And as a medic, my primary responsibility is to preserve life, initially for my guys, but then also we treat the enemy as well. So that can be a bit of mess with your head a little bit, because you're thinking, okay, these guys are shooting at me, and then if we injure them, then we go and treat them. But under the Geneva Convention, medical is very defined about what we can and can't do. So that was very interesting for me. I actually got stabbed treating a casualty in Iraq a couple of weeks in, and it was a guy that he was in contact with us, and he was shot, and I went to treat him. And then as I'm treating him, I thought he punched me in the side, and I didn't really take much notice of it. But what he'd actually done was stab me with a piece of shrapnel. And then I continued treating him, and then we got him off. And then later on, stood up, chatting to my friend. He goes, "You're covered in blood." I said, "Yeah, I've just been treating this casualty." And he goes, "No, there's a lot of blood." And I looked down, and I was stabbed. I didn't even feel it because my adrenaline was pumping, and we were in the thick of it. And then all my friends will remember me for is fainting at that point. Not the point that I've been stabbed or the point that I treated a casualty and saved somebody's life, but I fainted because there was a bit of blood on me. But that's the story that they like to tell me when we go for a drink, or if there's anyone new around. So that's it's always pretty good. Then we went to Afghanistan, but I was in a different role then. I was then an officer, and I was in charge of the deployment of medical staff throughout southern Afghanistan. Which was really tough. That I actually found that harder because I was involved in putting together the training package for them pre-Afghanistan. A lot of these guys came from ships, hospitals, submarines, so they weren't used to working on the ground. And it's a very, very different working environment, as you can imagine. And there was a lot of big operations that we planned, so we had to bolster with extra medical staff to get the medical timelines back to save life. But for me, the difficult bit was I was sending guys out on the ground that I thought in my head I was better trained and I had more experience, and I would have rather sent myself every single time. So there was a lot of sleepless nights when these operations were going on. But to the credit of every single person that we sent on the ground, they did an absolutely outstanding job. They were out on the ground the entire time during operations, and they saw some pretty nasty stuff. And they came back. We had one girl that stood on an IED, and it's called a partial detonation, so it wasn't a whole explosion, but it knocked her off her feet enough that she was injured and got sent back to the UK. And from about 3 weeks after she was back in the UK, I was receiving daily emails about how I can get back to support the guys on the ground. That's all she wanted to do. She didn't care about herself. She didn't care about the fact that she had been injured, and she could have stayed in the UK and had sat out the rest of the operation while we were out there, but she didn't. And then she eventually came back. We didn't put her out on the ground because of her injuries, but we had her in a support role back in Bastion. So that's the kind of caliber of people that I'm used to dealing with. So I take my hat off to those. Somalia was a different role because I was working with the EU at that time, and that was all about building governance within federal Somalia, trying to combine them, so setting up the police, judicial system, healthcare, Coast Guard, all that sort of stuff. Nothing moves quickly in Somalia. Everything is very political and very slow and quite frustrating, but we managed to get some big wins when we were out there. So it was quite good. Did that for just under 2 years. And at the end of it, I actually got 2 medals from the EU. Normally you get an operational medal or a planning medal. I actually got both because I spent more time actually on the ground than I did in Northwood, where I was supposed to be based. So when you meet your appointer at the end of every draft, a draft is a period of time you're with a company, for example. So you go to your appointer and he'll give you a few options and everything else. And I said, look, I've spent a lot of time away from home. I would like some time near home. And I was living in the Southwest. And he goes, what about Northwood? I said, but Northwood's London. That's nowhere near the Southwest. So how am I going to go home? And he goes, yeah, it'll be fine. You'll have weekends off, everything else. So I said, okay, I'll settle for that. But then he didn't tell me that it was an operational role. And my first week in Northwood, I was in Somalia. And I was going away for a week and coming back 6 weeks later. That's just the tempo of the operation that was out there. And then when things happened, there was just no point telling your family by the end of it, I'm coming back in 2 weeks, because 2 weeks would come and go and we'd still be on the ground. So it was, it's a tough time. It's really tough for families, of military families,
Of course, yeah.
being left behind. Sometimes I think it's harder than it is for the guys on the ground, because obviously when you're on the ground, it's very dangerous. but you've got people around you like-minded, you've got a clear purpose, what you have to do, and you don't get time to sit and think a lot of the time. You just work constantly, which is good. But then the people at home are constantly watching the news and seeing what's happening, and then for them it's quite tricky. So I think military families deserve like a huge round of applause. They're very seldom celebrated, but for them going away, it's very tough, and for the children as well, because that you try and play down what you're going to do and how dangerous it is, but with social media these days, there's very few places that you can hide with that sort of stuff.
Yeah, 100%. I wanted to. You said something about some of the people. I think when you're in Afghanistan, you were responsible. You were managing like a large team of medics who were like on the ground, right? And you said that was difficult for you because at the start you'd have been like, I want to send myself versus these other people. And for you, you said it was very difficult for them as well because they had come from submarines or other places or hospitals, right? So was it? I think in general, being a medic is almost like a traumatic experience in itself, because I've got a friend who's a doctor, and 15 years ago when he was a junior doctor, he said those first months working in medicine are very difficult because you're seeing people die on your watch for the first time. And then I imagine in a combat zone that's just accelerated like 100 times. So was that difficulty for them, and for you was that almost like the emotional aspect of it, like the mindset part of it, or talk to us more about that?
Yeah, so I purposely made myself in a position before I went to Afghanistan, knowing that I was going to go, that I wanted to be involved in the pre-training deployment for them, especially around the medical side. Because it's tough. Like you said, your friend, the doctor, losing somebody is hard, really, really hard. And then you're talking add women and children into the mix as well, not just combatants. Afghanistan was very different because nobody was wearing a uniform. You didn't know who was a farmer and who was trying to kill you. And it was very hard. And the biggest message I tried to get across to the medics before we deployed was you can't save everyone's life. You do everything you possibly can, but you can't save everyone's life. And you just have to accept that. And you don't accept that until you lose your first one. And that is really difficult. Like I lost people before I joined the military. And to this day, I remember every single one of them. And then all we could do was make sure that they were trained as highly as we could. Do I think they were trained enough? No. Do I think they were prepared physically enough? No, I don't. And I had many rows with senior people, and I was told to remember who I was. But I was passionate about making sure that they went out there to do their best job and they came back safe and alive. Thankfully, we didn't lose anyone. We lost quite a few people to injuries, and since then, like Wolverine colleagues of mine and medical staff as well have suffered massively with PTSD from when they went out there. So my philosophy always was, okay, if you can hand on heart say you've done everything you could possibly do right to save that casualty, well, then you're doing the right thing. So in terms of PTSD, I think I've been very, very lucky. I haven't really suffered with it. Yeah, I think about things now and again, and things pop up in your life and it brings you back to that place. But I've been very, very lucky. Some of my friends and colleagues haven't been. They've struggled with it massively since they left, and a lot of them.
Yeah, sorry, I was just going to ask, why do you think that is? Why have you, because I imagine, you've seen some horrific things, right, as you're talking about today. I guess, how have you coped? Like, how have you managed to stay mentally stable in these situations?
The 100% truth is I don't know. The things I've seen, I should have PTSD without a doubt. But like I said, I talked to myself before I went, and I said, okay, I really have to be very honest and brutal with myself, and you have to do the right thing because it's the right thing to do. Yeah, that's what my grandmother instilled in me since I was tiny. And treat others as you want to be treated. So they're like two messages that have stuck with me my entire life, and I try to impart that onto the people. Sometimes in a military situation, doing the right thing is doing what's controversial, and it's not going with the flow. You need to stand up sometimes and go, that's not right. Whether you're popular at that time or not. We had one situation, I can't go into in depth about it, where there was a bit of a standoff, and one of my guys had to stand in between both and say, okay, this isn't happening, not happening. And this guy was junior. He was it's called a medical assistant in the Navy, which is like a combat medic. He was the most junior person there, and he stood up, to his credit, and said, "This is not happening on my watch." I can't go into it, but he stood up and did the right thing when it wasn't a proper decision to make on either side. And he could have been ostracized for the entire time he was out there, and he knew that, but he took that on the chin. And the beauty about working with the Royal Marines is they're professional, and they know what the right things to do, and they're professional soldiers, and they're very, very good at thinking about stuff. It's not just doing what you're told; it's doing what you're told and then doing the right thing. So we call it, courageous followership. It's about, you have to do what you're told to do sometimes, but then you also have to be able to question. And we brought that into our consultancy bit, because the best teams I've worked with, whether it be in business or in the military, was the teams that when you tell them to do something, they will implement it down, but they'll challenge up. And that's exactly what you want to do. Yeah. So if you're telling them to do something, you want to listen to see maybe they've got a better way of doing it, which sometimes they do. And they will implement that message down, but they also won't be afraid to be in that open space of challenging up to say, I don't think this is the right thing to do, and maybe we should look at doing X, Y, and Z instead. And the beauty about working with a professional team like that, and we've tried to do that in our consultancy side of work as well, is that you can adapt, and no one person thinks they've got all the answers. So I work with CEOs a lot of the time, and a lot of the time with CEOs, they think that they have to have all the answers. They have to know everything. And they don't, because a lot of the times they don't know how to fix the printer. Yeah, that's IT. They don't need to know that, but they need to know the guy that knows that. And that's all they need to do. So they don't need to have all the answers. And I remember one thing I heard a long time ago was about Nelson Mandela had an interview, and Nelson Mandela's father was a chief. And he said in their culture, the chief was always the last person to speak. So you go into a room, sit down, say your hellos or whatever, but that's it. Go around the room and then listen to what everyone else has to say. And that does two very, very good things. One thing is you know what everyone else is thinking and what's going on. And there might be issues that you didn't know about before you went into the meeting. So rather than going in and giving the world according to Jay O'Malley on Wednesday afternoon, you go in and listen, and then you can make an informed decision. And like I said, there might be things pop up in that meeting that you didn't know were wrong or that are going better than you expected it to. So that's one of the things that we teach in the corporate side, is that, listen, go around your room, and then don't be afraid to ask for ideas as well. Yeah. So one of the things we would do is, this is when you're working in a really tight-knit group, is that you would give down your orders, saying, this is what I want done, this is why we want it done. And then the next question you ask, has anyone got any ideas or input into that? And then that's when you get your best ideas. And then all you do is take those ideas, put them back into your plan, adjust, and then redeliver your plan. That's the way the good teams in the military really work. And that's what we impart in our consultancy side of the business and in the team building side as well.
Yeah, I liked a lot what you said. Never heard it like that, but it makes total sense to me, is the challenge up, implement down, because that's something I always say to people I work with, people like Kat, who is like, feel free to challenge me, make me accountable. But then also, if you've got a project, you obviously want to make sure that that's implemented and is quick and efficient, right? Which is the implement down piece. So I really like that. And I also like the story around the Nelson Mandela story about the chief speaking last, because it enables him to listen to everyone's perspective. So obviously those are kind of two big takeaways, learnings, which I'll definitely take away from this. What else did you learn during your time in the Navy and the Marines that has helped you? Because obviously you've set up this business now, you're very successful. So I imagine there were so many lessons that you've learned that not all of us are going to have those 15 years you did. So what are some of the lessons we can learn, and the people listening to this podcast, in our daily lives?
Yeah, I think the biggest lessons that we try and get across to people is, don't be afraid to fail and learn from your failures. Obviously, you can't keep failing every day, because then you won't have a business. But what we find with some businesses is that when something goes wrong, they will spend so much time and energy trying to find who did it wrong, why it went wrong, and who's to blame. No. None of that really matters at that time in the world. Yeah, what you need to do is, okay, this has gone wrong. How are we going to fix it, and how are we going to stop it happening next time? That's it. And then move on from it and learn your lessons. So we do a thing in the military called lessons learned and lessons identified. Okay, so a lesson learned is, okay, I'm not going to do that again because it didn't work.
Yeah.
Lesson identified is, okay, we know that that's not going right. We don't know the answer yet, but we put it on a list, and then we're going to come back to that. And then when we've done what we need to do, then we'll come back to that. And that's very, very important. The blame culture in business, there's no, in my world of business, there's no space for it, because you just waste time and energy on nothing productive. I think it was, there's a quote from the Mulligan brothers, I don't know if you heard of them, and they've got this Buddhist monk that puts these little nuggets of wisdom on there. And he said, if you're running around being very, very busy and producing nothing, try doing nothing and see what you produce. And it's the best thing I've ever heard, because lots of times I'm extremely busy and producing nothing. Yeah. And then you need to say, okay, stop. Why am I so busy? But there's nothing happening here. I need to adjust what I'm doing. And I think we can all find ourselves in that as well. Yeah, and the beauty about consultancy and bringing in an external company into your business is that with a fresh set of eyes, you can see things that they can't see, because they're so ingrained into what they're doing, and they've got timelines and deadlines and financial targets they have to hit, that they can't see what's going on around them. And sometimes we can go in and it can be a very simple fix, or it can be something that has to be implemented over a period of time. But at least then we can start helping and then bringing them along their way. What I learned in the military, lessons I would say, is mutual respect. It doesn't matter. There's a saying in the military that there's no rank in the bank, yeah? So it doesn't matter what rank you are. It doesn't make any difference, really. It's just a chain of command. So we tell people, and this is something that I 100% do, is I don't care if I'm looking the CEO in the eye or the cleaner in the eye. It doesn't make any difference. You treat every man and woman the exact same, give them the same level of respect and courtesy, and then you get the best out of them that way. There's a very good story about JFK during the NASA program. I don't know if you heard it, when he said that they're going to put in a man on the moon by X amount of time. And they were getting close to it. And Kennedy went down to Cape Canaveral, and he's walking around doing his tour, meeting all the engineers and everything else. And then he comes across this guy. At the time, he was called a janitor. He's probably called a cleaning technician these days, who knows? But he spoke to this guy, and he goes, oh, what's your job? And it was very clear what he did. He was wearing his uniform. He had his mop and bucket and everything else. And he said, sir, I'm here to put a man on the moon. And Kennedy went away going, do you know what? That's the best answer I've ever heard. You're not here to clean the place, but by you cleaning the place and make sure that everyone's offices are ready, that they can get into and do that, you're doing your bit to put the man on the moon. Yeah. And that's what we need to do in our businesses every day, is we need to say, okay, it doesn't matter if we're working with a professional rugby team and we ask them who's in your team, and they'll generally look around at the 14, 15 people in the room, and then they'll forget about the physio, the kit man, the driver, the admin that books all their flights and hotels and everything else. They don't count those as the team, but they're probably the most important part of the team. It's like the picture you see of the Formula One team with the driver sat in the car, and he comes into the pit lane and there's like 20 people around him that are doing all the stuff to make sure that the car is safe and ready to go out and win that race. They're just as important as that person sat behind the wheel. But the person behind the wheel, in everyone's mind, is the most important person in that crew, and he's not. And we need to remember, when we start thinking that we're that driver and we're the most important part of that cog, we need to remember that it's the whole machine that gets us to that point where we need to get to. And whether that's a project, big or small, it doesn't matter. Just keep that mentality and you won't go wrong. Yeah. Looking after each other is a huge thing. So we work a lot around the EQ sort of space, because we work with some companies and they're obviously very, very smart bunch of people to get to where they are, but their EQ isn't great. So when they get promoted into leadership roles, a lot of them often fail because they just haven't been given those tools to be able to help them get to the next level. And one thing we've come across as well with some businesses is, if somebody's going to be promoted up to the next level to be in a leadership role, ask them, do they want to do that? A lot of them get promoted because they're doing well at their job. And we work with sales guys that are really good at selling, and then they get promoted and then they fail because they haven't been given the tools to manage other people. And maybe they don't want to because they're very good salespeople and they're making lots of commission. So that's a lesson we impart to some of our companies as well. Is okay, if you want to promote somebody for doing really, really well, ask them, do they want to be promoted to the next level, or keep doing what they're doing to enable them to be successful. And ultimately, it's the we all win or we all fail mentality.
Yeah, as we do sales training, we've definitely seen that a lot. And I've had a lot of those conversations before thinking about becoming a manager. So, well, actually being an individual contributor, just being a salesperson is often a lot less stressful than, managing 10 other people. And going to what
Yeah.
you were talking about earlier with your time in Afghanistan, you can't control the other people. You can just train them, give them a bridge and a guide, but they're the ones that have then got to do the implementation. So yeah, that can sometimes be a very stressful thing when you're first in a
Yeah.
management position.
One of the big things I took from the military as well, and we do it in all aspects of our business, whether it's the team building, managing ourselves, which is just as important as looking after other teams, and in
Yeah,
the consultancy side, is the what and the why. What are we doing and why we need to do it? And I don't tell them how. I give
yeah,
them the tools to do it, and I don't need to know the nitty gritty. I just need to know that it gets done. And when you've got a really good team, what and why is all you have to give to them, and then they'll go ahead and give the plan. And that's something that in the military is imparted to you at a very early stage. So whether you're a corporal that's in charge of a squad that has to go out, his commander will just tell him, we need to take that objective over there. These are your men. And this is why it's important, why we do it. And then the corporal then will go away and make his plan and then carry out the objective. And that's
yeah.
how the best businesses that we worked with and sports teams as well, when they some of them have it already, and some of them, once they learn that lesson, the
Mm,
penny drops and it all makes sense, and then they achieve great things from there.
yeah. So one of the lessons you mentioned was around the importance of teamwork and working together. I know you had an incredible story around like an expedition to Everest that you did for charity, and I imagine there was a lot of teamwork involved in that. So yeah, could you run us through that story?
Yeah, so I led a group for Wooden Spoon, the children's rugby charity that we've had a great relationship with since pretty much starting the company. And the opportunity came up to set 2 world records on Everest. And of course, coming from my background, I thought, that's amazing. I want to be part of this. And then I managed to be part of it. And then Sarah Webb, who's the CEO of Wooden Spoon, like, she's an amazing lady, said to me, okay, we can get you on it, but would you lead the team because of your military experience, etc. And I went, yeah, no problem. I'll do that. In the back of my head, I was thinking, no, I just want to do it and have fun and not have any responsibility. But then it made sense because a lot of the people had never climbed mountains or done anything. I've been at altitude a couple of times before. And we had a couple of training weekends in Scotland and up in the Lake District, and it's difficult to prepare somebody for altitude because everyone responds differently to altitude,
No.
and you can be at altitude this month and 2 months go and do it again and not be good. That's how altitude works. There's no rhyme or reason to it. The guys I gave them fitness plans, dietary plans, kit plans, what they needed to bring with them. And of course, when we got to Everest, it was like a bit of a cluster where everyone had all the kit in the world because they bought everything that was on the
Mm,
list, but then didn't really know what to do with it. So we had to go back to basics about organizing your kits, packing your kit properly, looking after each other. So if you want one life lesson to take away from this chat, okay? So at the start, and just before we set off for Everest, when we had all the families at Heathrow Airport, and I had to give a speech to try and calm the nerves to my guys that we're going to be good, I'll look after you. And for the
mm,
families, I'm going to look after them. And I said from the start to everyone, I said, no one person is going to get up Everest by themselves, set these records, and come back down safely. You have to work as a team. You have to look out for each other, and you have to ask for help. Who
yeah,
didn't do it? Me. Yeah. I just thought, okay, I'm the leader. They're looking up to me. They know my ex-military experience. They know what I've done. I was physically fit. I did everything I could possibly do. And I was the
mm,
one person that nearly died. And the reason why I nearly died was because I had a high altitude pulmonary edema, which basically means my lung filled up with blood and I couldn't breathe, and
wow,
I had to get casevaced off the mountain. There was no glorious helicopter to come and take me off because they couldn't open the airspace to get me in. So I had like 15 hours in the back of a yak to get down even to base camp,
wow,
and another 14 years in a minibus across the Himalayas to get into Nepal. We were in Tibet, I forgot to say that. So I didn't ask for help. I struggled at some parts of it, but I wanted them to see me as the leader that had their back and was going to look after them. So the way it would work, we go out on a hike during the day doing our altitude training. So it'd be a long line of people with different lengths of experience and fitness levels. So I would start at the back and then work my way forward and then get to the front, making sure they're okay. And then I would drop back and I'd be checking people all the way down and giving them motivation and morale and keeping people going and make sure everyone's looking after each other on the back. So when we do like a 5 or 6K walk, I probably walk 15, 20K. You know what I mean? Because I'm constantly up and down this line all the time trying to make sure everyone is okay. With the altitude stuff, I struggled. I carried more weight than everyone else. I wanted to make sure that I was last one in every day so everyone was in and safe. And then when it happened to me, it happened all of a sudden. We went in to set the last world record, which was full contact rugby at 6,600 meters, which we did. And I spoke to the doctor, Dr. Georgios Tisanos, a Greek doctor expedition, amazing person, saved my life. And I said to him, look, I found that harder coming in than I should have, but I think I'm okay. And he listened to my lungs and he said, look, on the left-hand side, it's a little bit crackly. You might have picked up an infection, but we'll just keep an eye on it. I think you'll be okay. So then from then to like 40 minutes later, I went critical very, very fast. I went downhill, really struggled to breathe, in the worst pain I've ever been in my entire life. But I was still an hour away from advanced base camp. So we had to go across ladders and climb ropes and do everything like you see on TV to get back. And at stages, I was on my hands and knees, couldn't breathe, I just had nothing left in the tank. To get to advanced base camp, eventually got back there. I was in a pretty bad way. We were trying to get helicopters and all sorts, and they couldn't get a helicopter into advanced base camp because of the altitude, but they could have from intermediate camp. But we just couldn't for lots of reasons. The Chinese wouldn't open the airspace to let a rescue helicopter in. That's why I wound up on a yak. And then we got down to intermediate camp. I still remember bits and pieces all the time because I blocked out lots, right? But I remember being at intermediate camp and there was 3 or 4 of the guides there. And I got into this tent and they had a fire on and it was really nice and warm. And they're giving me hot, sweet tea, which I can't stand tea, but it was the best thing in the world. And they're taking my clothes off me. And it would have been so easy for me at that point to say, do you know what? Leave me here. We'll start again tomorrow morning and then just go. But the reality is if I'd done that, I would have been dead in the morning. I was that ill. So the doctor was on the phone saying, unless we get a helicopter in here now to get this man off the mountain, he's going to die. And I'm listening to this. And I've also got a medical brain, okay? So I'm thinking, okay, I know A, B, and C, and I also know what D, and E, and F means as well. If it's not done in this order, I'm pretty poorly. So I said to him, right, let's get back on the yak. It was getting towards darkness, and you don't want to be wandering around Everest in the dark because the temperature drops dramatically cold. The yak I was on isn't like this beautiful thing with a saddle that I can sit down and relax. It's a wild animal with no saddle, no blanket, no nothing. I'm basically sat on the back of it, so my spine against it. So I had compression, spinal injuries after it and everything else. And when the yak wants to go to the toilet and go drink some water, it's going to go and do that regardless of who's on the back. So I got thrown off a couple of times. I got kicked in the chest by the yak at one stage. I thought it was like getting hit by a baseball bat. And I had these 2 Sherpas that were with me that didn't speak a word of English that were trying to lift me up and everything else. And I was in so much pain. And you know, one of those times in your life when you're thinking, okay, just leave me alone. Just give me 5 minutes. Let me have my little pity party here for 5 minutes and I'll be fine. And they're trying to pull me up and dress me and do everything. And I was like, oh my God. So we made the decision then just to crack on down to base camp, and at least then I could get in a vehicle and try and get into Nepal. So I managed to get down, and it was like I said, the worst pain I've ever been in my entire life. And it came in waves, and this is in between trying to breathe. We only had a 15-liter oxygen cylinder, so that was turned down quite low, so I was getting something. And then I remember halfway down, it's pitch dark at this stage, and we've all got head torches on, and temperature has dropped right the way down. My feet are freezing because normally you're walking, so you keep it warm. I'm sat on this thing, my feet are freezing, and then I really needed a wee. And I got off this thing, and you're like the Michelin man. You got 50,000 layers on you, all these duvet jackets and trousers and everything else. So I said I needed a wig, and they helped me off it. And then I got like 5 guys trying to undo my fly to help me to go to the toilet. And I go, guys, I've got it. And of course, they don't speak English, and they're trying to do their best and everything else. So eventually got that done. And then about half hour from the end, the Tibetan Mountain Rescue turned up with about 20 guys, but they couldn't really do anything either. They just guided us into camp. Then I got down, and then we were trying to get helicopters in there, and it wasn't. So then we made the decision to get in the minibus. And this is like a crappy old Toyota Hiace minibus that's, just shuttles across the mountains and stuff. And we were still at like 5,500 meters at that stage. So the altitude was still quite high. And when you've got one lung working not 100% either, it was pretty scary time. So Georgios managed to cannulate me, give me more oxygen, get some fluids into me. And then we said, okay, we just need to set off as quick as possible. So they got us a driver. And I'm in the back of this minibus driving these like horrendously bumpy roads. Like, we complain about potholes, yeah? These potholes, you could drive in one side and drive out the other side. That's how big they were. And you're going across these mountain roads with snow and ice everywhere. And Georgios fell asleep beside me, and it's nice and warm in there. So I open up my jacket and stuff. And then I breathed in, and then I couldn't breathe back out. And I go, what the hell? And I'm like, it's like, imagine somebody choking you, but there's no one there. So I went into respiratory rest, where I actually stopped breathing. And George beside me, and I squeezed his arm as tight as I could. And thankfully, he recognized straight away what was going on and managed to get me onto my bad side. So at least my other side could inflate, and he put some needles in my chest to decompress things. Up until that point, I said to everyone, I don't want my family to know anything until I'm safe and sound in hospital and well. At that point, I was thinking, right, I need to make some phone calls here because I'm not 100% sure I'm going to make it to the hospital. So I got to the hospital, got to the Chinese border, and it was the craziest thing in the world. They wouldn't let us go across the border from Tibet into Nepal because we didn't have visas. This is no word, and I'm like on death's door. I said, you haven't got a visa, you can't get in. And then they searched through all my equipment, and I had a satellite phone in my bag. And they go, why you've got a sat phone? You British spy that you're in the country and you're selling secrets and everything else. And I go, I can barely talk. I said, I got a sat phone. I said, we registered in China when we came in with all of our sat phones, with our numbers and serial numbers and everything else. And they were trying to make, I don't know if they were trying to get money out of us or make a political statement or whatever. But eventually I had 2 fixers come in from Nepal that basically bundled me into the back of a pickup truck and just drove me across. Half my gear is still in China to this day. And then we got into about another 4 hours on really bad roads, because this wasn't long after the earthquake in Nepal. So a lot of the roads were gone. So we were on dirt roads. And every bump was like being stabbed in the chest. The pain, and I'm pretty good with pain, yeah? Like I said, I got stabbed, I didn't even feel it. So I'm pretty good with that sort of stuff. And the pain was off the chart, and it was so bad. But I think I said to you this before, I don't know what's that bit in the human brain or soul or heart or whatever you want to say doesn't let you stop fighting. Yeah, that there was never once in my mind getting to hospital was there a point that I'm not going to make it. Not once. I just went, right, I need to get out of hospital. I need to do this, this, and this medically to get sorted so I can go home. That was all that was in my mind. There was not for a second was there, I can't do this or I'm going to die or any of that sort of stuff. It never entered my head. And I don't know what does that. I'm not saying I'm amazing or it's the military background or anything. I just don't know what that answer is, because I think some people just switch off and some people switch on. And I don't know what causes that. So got in within striking distance of Kathmandu, and they managed to get a helicopter at that point. And literally, rather than drive another 6 hours around the mountain, they just 20 minutes in a helicopter scooped me into hospital. So you're sat there now, we're chatting, your saturation of oxygen is probably 99 to 100%. So that's the amount of oxygen in your blood. When I got into Kathmandu, mine was 36, which is like severely low. You're talking getting into the realms of brain damage and organ failure and everything else. And I wasn't able to speak properly, but I was able to say like 5 or 6 words in one block, and then I'd have to breathe and get enough energy to speak again. So I was saying to them, I said, look, I'm a medic. I said, I'm used to dealing with this thing. You need to put a chest drain in me now to release the fluid. So a chest drain is you just put in simple terms, putting a pipe in between your ribs into the cavity, and it drains off air or fluid or whatever's in there. In my case, it was blood. And I'm arguing with this consultant from India, and he goes, "No, we're used to dealing with altitude illnesses. We'll treat you with antibiotics, and you'll be fine." I'm going, "No." I said, "You need to do this." I said, "I'm going to die if you don't do this." So anyway, at that point, I was like in and out of consciousness, and I was all over the shop. So I just had to go with what they wanted. They put a needle in my back about that length, and they pulled off 50 mils of this blacky green blood out the back. And even then, they wouldn't put a chest drain on me. But I was too weak at that stage, so I went straight into intensive care, which was like the craziest psychedelic experience of my life. I was seeing doctors floating around the rooms. I saw halos above people. I saw auras. I thought, I was on my way. That was it. And the managed to get out of there. I was 3 weeks in hospital there. Managed to blag my way back to the UK. And I literally had to blag my way back because I still only had one lung. The other one was full of blood, which was slowly but surely turning into pus as well. So I was having crazy infections and everything else. But you need a fit to fly cert to be able to get back to the UK on a commercial aircraft. So they're going, you've only got one lung. We can't figure out what's wrong with you. So we can't do it. I said, look, let me do the test. I said, all I can do is fail it. Yeah. So I had two nurses helping me down. And, I don't know if you've ever been to Nepal, but the people are quite small. And like, there was like two of them bringing me down, and they kept calling me Jason. And I didn't figure out till like week 2. And because the way I came off the mountain and everything else, and I was literally in my mountain clothes when I came in, I was stinking of yak. They thought I was like Jason Bourne. So that's what their nickname for me was, Jason. And then they got me down, and I did the fit to fly test, which is where they put oxygen on you, and they do lots of tasks to see if your body is able to do it. And I passed the test. How, I have no idea. My right lung must be the best lung in the world, because I managed to pass it, managed to get myself back to the UK, arrived in Heathrow. 3 hours later, I went into hospital in Exeter, where I was living. 2 hours after that, I was in surgery in Derriford. That's how ill I was. And it took 3.5 litres of pus out of my left lung. Over the next couple of weeks, it slowly reinflated and got better. But as crazy as that will sound, that was only the start of the journey, because I spent another year in hospital, in and out, with liver failure, pancreatitis, with weird infections, and a thing called red man syndrome that they only ever seen in textbooks. It was just one thing after the next. And I think my body was so low at that point, everything was just smashing me. And like even the antibiotics that they were giving me nearly killed me in the end, because it was causing liver failure. So then they stopped everything else. And the year after that, then I had a few in and outs of hospital. And then thankfully, since then, I've been okay so far.
Wow.
But I always think to myself, and maybe it's PTSD, I don't know. But I always think to myself, what makes you not give up? And what makes you carry on? What gives you that resilience? Is it something that's imprinted into your DNA? Is it something that you're taught as a child? Is it something I learned in the military? Is it just me as a human being? Is there somebody else looking after me? I have no idea.
Yeah.
But I knew there was never a single second throughout that entire journey that I was willing to give up at all. To the fact that I rang up a friend of mine, Jamie Sanderson, who runs a really good ex-military charity called Rock to Recovery. And he deals a lot with guys with PTSD. And I said, Jamie, look, I'm in hospital. I'm pretty poorly. I don't think I've got PTSD because I've never had any problems. But I said, something's not right. And he sent in Nikki, one of his coaches, and she came into me in hospital. And I didn't believe I had PTSD. And then I said, okay, look, I'll try anything at this stage. So she came in, and she's from Newcastle. She's maybe 5 foot, right? She's tiny, and she's absolutely lovely. And she came into me, and she goes, we had a chat about different things. And then somebody came to take me for an MRI. And I said, look, I'm really sorry. At this point, I thought it was all bullshit, right? Didn't take any real notice of it because I was in this like weird headspace. But I was willing to listen. And then she goes, okay, but before I go, can I just ask you one question? And I said, yeah, what is it? And she goes, when are you going to stop fighting? And I'm there going, whatever. So I went off to my MRI. She went and she goes, look, if you want me, we can book in a session now
Mm.
or whatever. I said, no, I'm fine. I said, I don't think I need anything. And then for the next 2 or 3 days, I just kept thinking about this in my head. Okay, when am I going to stop fighting? And then she was 100% right, because I had to fight to get off the mountain. I had to fight to get into hospital. I had to fight to get out of hospital. I had to fight to get back to the UK. And I
Mm.
was in this 100% fight mode constantly. So I was on alert state 10. There was
Yeah.
nothing lower than 10. And then I rang her up and I said, okay, I just want to talk about what you said about the not fighting thing. And then she went through it and it made total sense. And then from then on, I started getting better, because I was able to take a breath, have that tactical pause that I could just go, okay, I'm safe now. I don't have to keep fighting. I need to get better. And then from then on, I started getting better. So that one statement that she did, she helped me after that quite a few sessions as well, just talking through things and that. But it made perfect sense. And I just needed that one person to say that one thing to me. And like I said, when we go into companies and we can see things with a fresh set of eyes, it's amazing what you can see. And like
Yeah.
she came in and like she helped me absolutely no end.
Well, yeah,
Sorry,
because
that
I
was
was
a
no,
rant.
no, it's an incredible story. I was as we were going through it, I think you kind of answered my question. I was going to ask, like, what was what did you learn from that experience? Because near death experiences, I've read a lot about it. Obviously, it sounds like, with the hallucinate, well, maybe not hallucinations, but things you were seeing, right, in the
Yeah.
hospital. So that's one thing. But then I imagine it changed you in some way, and it sounds like that was the biggest takeaway for you, was you were constantly in this fighting mode, trying to fight to get better, which was good, that determination. But it got to a point where you're in the UK a year later, and it actually needed to be, hey, I need to relax. I need to be like more in the moment, right?
Yeah. For me, it was a reaffirming time for lots of different stuff. One, I knew I was on the right track with the business, because going back to my original business plan, I don't want to work for somebody else. I want to change the world. I mean, I know from the projects that we do make a real impact on people's lives, like a real lasting impact. People speak about legacy and all that sort of stuff. If you want to change the world, change it today, not tomorrow, not
Yeah.
next week. Start today. And if you help one person today, hopefully that person will help two people tomorrow. That's
Yeah.
sort of my mindset now. And I also don't take myself as serious as I used to. I think coming out of the military, you kind of have something to prove, that you did well in there when you're in this very controlled, regimented. Everything's really done for you. All you got to do is your job. And then when you come out, you think that everyone, I don't know, they see like SAS, are you tough enough and all that sort of stuff. And they think that that's the way ex-military people behave. That's not how we behave. In our business, the military side is a very light touch. If people want to talk about it, fine. If not, fine as well.
Yeah.
There's no shouting. There's no, you got to do press ups if you get this wrong or any of that. So we don't do any of that, because you don't have to. And I think that's the experience about being, coming close to dying and losing everything. And I'm not talking about losing your car, your house, your money, that sort of stuff. That's irrelevant. None of that really, really matters. What matters is that you're healthy. So my sergeant major used to say
Yeah.
to me, your best weapon is your body. Forget about everything else you can get. If your body's not there, nothing else matters. And he's 100% right. So you got your health and you got friends and family around you that care about you and love you. That's all that really matters in life. Making money, yeah, is something we have to do. Creating a business because we're all purpose driven and we all want to do something and achieve and be the best at what you can do. Yeah, of course, that's what we're going to do, because that's human nature. But when you boil it down, being happy and being loved and
Yeah.
healthy, that's it. And if
Yeah.
you can get those three things, you're a very wealthy man.
Yeah, that's a great way to finish a show. We're going to put your website in the show notes, but if anyone wants to get in contact with you, what's the best way to contact you, Jay?
Yeah, just jump on our website or contact me direct. It's fusioninitiatives.com. Michael will share my details with you, but please, if you want to change your team, make a difference in your community, and help ex-veterans, come and see us. We're taking bookings now for next year. We've had a quieter year than we wanted this year, but now is our time to reflect and learn, and then make a plan to attack next year. So yeah, please get in contact with us. We'd love to help you out.
Awesome. Well, yeah, enjoyed your probably some of the best stories we've had on the show. So yeah, thanks a lot for the time today, Jay. So what a story that Mount Everest near-death experience was at the end for Jay. and really incredible. And I think his fighting spirit, it's interesting that it was both damaging, but also what saved his life, because I think it took him so many hours to get to the hospital. Maybe if he hadn't had that determination that I'm going to survive, I'm going to get back to my family, I'm going to see my kids, then maybe he would have died, right? So that fighting spirit saved his life. But as he said, when he got back to the UK and he was still in hospital, and obviously because of his medical experience, he understands everything that's going on and he's trying to advise the doctors, he's trying to control everything. Actually, that fighting spirit was damaging to him. And it was only when the therapist said to him, you need to stop fighting. And that was a real life-changing moment for him, where he started to surrender. He started to be more in the moment, both versus focusing on the future and getting better. And that's actually what led to his health recovering and him now being really successful in his business. And a bit of business advice or leadership advice he gave, which I really liked, was challenge up, implement down. So don't be scared to challenge leaders. As long as you're doing it in a constructive way, they'll actually have more respect for you. But at the same time, be someone that gets stuff done. So if you're working on a project or you're managing a team yourself, that implementation piece is key as well. So I really like that as someone running a company. So the stories we've heard today from Jay, I thought they were incredible. So share them with your friends on WhatsApp or whatever communication channels you use. As I said earlier, a review, subscribing to us is appreciated to spread the word. And I'll see you all next week. Cheers.